sit beside me, no problem. People do not bite, I promise. The axiom of set chairs up here, people want to sit over there or back there, or anyways, good morning. Welcome to our second to last convocation. This semester we have been working through what it looks like to serve from our heart, to give of ourselves, and there's been a wide variety of things. From the beginning of our convocation series, we heard from Dr. Webb and the trustee who moved to a trailer court to show love, to people in Nashville who decided to do something about sex trafficking and prostitution to help women who have been abused, to our friends in the Presbyterian Church in Venezuela and all of their work in the midst of just a massive crisis. And then we looked at local things like the Red Cross, Turning Point, the domestic violence shelter. And but today it's a real privilege for us to hear from one of our own, Brad Marcum, who has been, for some of us who have been here a while at the university, has served in various roles at the university, but also serves as a larger-than-life kind of personality. And the reason why I have this, I trolled Brad's Facebook today to get on his Facebook to find pictures, but I love this picture because one of the things you'll know about Brad is that he's an avid sports fan and knows a lot about sports, played lots of sports, but Brad for me is a larger-than-life personality who, when you know, you instantly grow to love. So this shows baseball and his great love. Brad's done a host of things throughout his life, from being an English professor. Probably, I would say, probably your greatest accomplishment is being a grandfather, right?
Yeah.
That's what I kind of figured. If you notice Brad's Facebook, there's just a few pictures of grandkids. So
maybe about 23,000.
23,000. In saying that, Brad's last role here at the university was working with our osteopathic medical school and working on testing, right? And became quite an expert in that field and traveled all around. But we just really appreciate, Brad, you being with us, kind of sharing this conversation today. And what I thought we would start with is you have been in higher education for a very long time.
35, almost 40 years at this point, yeah.
Okay, and I wondered if you would maybe walk us through, like, why a teacher and why higher education?
That's a good question. Originally, I thought I would be a lawyer, but then I worked with lawyers and politicians, decided that I was going to be taking too many showers, and realized I didn't want to do that. I also worked with people I was a USC film student, so I worked with people in all forms of different places. One of my first jobs I had at the school at USC, let me back up for a second. I started out from, this is going to sound like something out of a Steve Martin story, but I was born a small brown child in southern Ohio, in the farms land. My first few years of life was away from humans. We lived in, matter of fact, outside Medford, Ohio, which we actually have somebody from Medford here. Thank you very much. Which stunned me when I found out he was from Medford, because I didn't think anybody else was still from Medford at this point. But we literally didn't know other people. We were like wildebeest children or something. I mean, we just wandered around a lot. And then we moved to another smaller town, and I knew from an early age that I was different. I literally thought I was Kal-El, that I came from another planet, because I figured out pretty early on that I already knew how to read when I was like a year and a half old, because my mother had already started reading to me, and I picked up on it quickly. So I've always had was always intrigued by things. I got in trouble when I was a small child because I would take apart like the telephone. And back then, phones are a whole different world now compared to what we had.
Yes.
And So you had a phone. And that phone may have multiple people listening to it at one time because he had party lines. And it wasn't the kind of party line like, hey baby, how you doing? It was some little old lady listening into conversations about who was sleeping with who down the street. But I took apart a telephone one day and just to see how it worked. And I was, 2, I think. And my mother freaked out because when she reached to pick up the phone when it rang, the whole thing came up apart. And next thing I heard, Bradley Dale. Oh, okay, that's never good to hear the full name. And said, well, yeah, I was just testing it out. She's like, well, don't do that again. So I've always wanted to go into education in some form. I wasn't sure how, but I was also intrigued by politics. So I've also worked for multiple people. I worked for Governor Brown in California, who is still Governor Brown in California, another time around. Who was an intriguing character because when he was governor, the governor before him was Ronald Reagan. And whenever the Reagans moved into the State House, Nancy, his wife, would go on to do this at the White House too. She changed the White House around the decoration. She did the same thing for the governor's place. And Jerry said, I'm a single guy, I don't need a mansion. And he got an apartment across the street from the, where you'd meet to talk with in the school system, or not school system, sorry, the legislature. So we would meet there for meetings, all sitting there on the floor, looking around like, what are we doing? Because he'd have all the young Democrat leaders there, and I was one of those. So he was a real intriguing guy, but it was a different experience at the time. But it gets you into weird different places because suddenly we'd have different accounts, and one of those experiences was to go to events with him or to go to functions. And one of those functions was when he won the re-election. I got a note from my political science professor, who was my mentor, and he said, you need to go to that party for that. It's going to be, there's parties up and down the entire California coast, but the last one is going to be down here in Southern California. And I said, I'm a kid from Ohio, what am I doing this? And he's like, the governor really likes you, he thinks you're funny, he also thinks you have a future in this, so you need to go. And I was like, okay, come on, seriously. He's like, why am I talking to you if you're not listening to me? Yes, sir, I'll go. Well, at the same time, the governor also was dating Linda Ronstadt. And for many of you, you may have no idea who I'm talking about right now. But that's okay. This old one's in the crowd, we know who it is. And my roommate was a big Linda Ronstadt freak. So he found out what I was doing. He's like, I can go help you if you want to, since I got a car. And I had no car, so I was like, yeah, let me help you do that. So we got directions where to go for this place. And the problem is, there was no Google Maps at that time. We had maps.
Yes.
And you had to go find someplace where to go. So we're driving around, we're in Santa Monica, and we're over finding places. We pull up someplace, and I say, hey, I think this is it. So we pull up, and I knock on the door, and this woman opens the door. I turn around and say, I'm sorry, ma'am, we clearly got the wrong house, I need to go. And my roommate looks at me and says, like, no, we gotta go, because he didn't see who it was. And then as I started walking away, she said, are you looking for Governor Brown's party? And I said, yeah, actually I am. She said, oh, it's in here. Well, the problem why I freaked out was it was Jane Fonda. It was Jane Fonda's house I was at. And that's why I went, clearly I'm in the wrong house. And she's like, no, we're holding the party. But I'd forgotten that she had married another guy who was into the Democratic Party. And he was also the best friend of my mentor, who didn't bother to tell me that as we were getting there. So one of the first things I told my roommate was, I know you're a freak for her, but settle down, don't go crazy, but also realize that your heroes aren't always who you think they're gonna be. Because I'd seen them together before, and I knew there were some issues that he probably didn't understand. So we're waiting around. My roommate spends half the night drinking everything in sight around the place because there was just alcohol everywhere and all these different people. And then the governor shows up with Linda, and first thing he does is like get all the young people together. We gotta talk because that's all he ever wanted to do. And of course, Linda's bored. She's wandering around, and so we go away with that. A little bit later, we get done. I come back out, and I see my roommate with his head hanging down. And at that point, I saw Linda come out of the bathroom working her nose pretty hard. And at that point in time in California, you knew what that meant. It's a snow party. Mm-hmm. She's hitting the drugs pretty hard right up her nose. And he's just devastated. So all the way back, he said, you gotta drive. I can't drive. I can't even think now. He was all messed up. So you find out that there's different things that happen that you don't expect. Mm-hmm. I also work with the people in other fields. Like I said, one of the strangest things that ever happened is that I'm in 2 movies. I'm in Rocky 2. How in God's name did I get into Rocky 2? Well, one day in class, our professor says, we have a special guest today, and he wants to talk to this class. So we're all waiting there, seeing what's going on. And in walks Sylvester Stallone, like, hey, what's up? And the place goes crazy. You know, we're all going nuts. And so he explained that when they first was making Rocky, he had different versions of the ending that he wanted to use, but he couldn't decide which one he liked best. He kept going back and forth. So he decided to go to the USC Film School to talk to those young students about what it might look like. So he showed them the film, and he showed them 2 different versions, and they told him the version that you use, it ended up being the one that they actually used for the movie. So he always said he always felt an obligation to our school. So he said, now we're getting ready to make Rocky 2, and it's supposed to take place in Philadelphia, but we're not going to Philadelphia, it's gonna cost too much. We're gonna do it right here in LA, and does anybody here wanna be in a Rocky movie? Well, of course, the place went berserk again. We're all screaming and doing this and that. And so we all get excited. Because we were extras, we didn't get paid. So they gave us Famous Amos cookies and Olympia beer, which for college students, that was fine. I mean, we were good with that. You know, give us some more. So we would have to, he said, no, you gotta wear some clothes that looks like you're in an actual big movie fight. So, okay, so we all did that. And we'd have to move around from place to place. And then we had people come over and tell us, now whatever you do, don't laugh when he has to stand on that little step, because he wasn't anywhere near the size of Apollo Creed. He had to stand up on this little statue so he could look up and look around. So we're all like, trying not to laugh at our star here. So we go through all this, and they film like 15 different endings, so we wouldn't know who to tell people, you know, here's what actually happens at the end. So we had no idea. But when it all came over, they thanked us and they gave us all that stuff, so we had a good time. Originally, I was thinking I was going to be a lawyer, but like I said, I started working with a lot of the law people, and it's a great thing to have, but it just wasn't for me. Working for politicians, I found out didn't work for me, because I found out when I worked for Governor Brown's for his attempt to be a senator, he had me be as one of the people that was part of his group that would practice for the debates. Now back then, again, we didn't have Google. We had to go to a library, go get microfiche, again, words you've never heard probably before in your life. But it's tiny little things, and you had to look at this, and you try to find out what each of these people who were writing about the campaign, what kind of questions they might ask. And we actually got it down pretty well. We had like 15 questions that we were pretty sure this is what they're going to ask. And then we had to practice throwing out oddball questions when someone threw out something like, well, what do you think about this? And we'd all stare. But we did a pretty good job with that. But then I realized we also found out ways of how to make the question suddenly turn not to be the question. We would put the question this way. If you asked this question and it wasn't one we liked, we had an answer for that one. Years later, I got a big chuckle out because I couldn't watch debates on TV because I realized, oh, there's where the pivot takes place. And I watched our lovely former governor of Alaska do that in her vice president's speech that day when they asked her a question. She said, I'm not going to ask that question. I have my own question I want to ask. So she just completely went off the script what everybody else would normally do. So it's like, yeah, that's the reason why I got out of this business. I thought I was going to do stand-up, but then I realized after a while I needed to eat and actually have a place to sleep. Because back then, that wasn't a big thing. Mm-hmm. But there were 3 of us who would go to the comedy clubs every night. And because one of the guys that I knew was already in television. He was a high school student. And again, showing my age here, it was called Real People on NBC. And they had a bunch of people, and they had a young African-American young man who was in high school who was a stand-up comedian. Well, one of my best friends of the Democratic Party group, they were high school students together. And so he said, man, you're funny, come with us. So we would sit there and sit in the comedy clubs and watch Richard Pryor come in and do his routine. And I thought, there's no way I can do this business. And then I'd see David Letterman. I had to go pick up Letterman one time because I was also on the SGA at SE. And they always, anytime we had any kind of comedian come in, they'd have me go because they say, well, hell, you're the funny guy, go do that. So I'd go up to LAX with my little sign like, Mr. Letterman. And I'll never forget the first time he walked in, he looked at me, he said, all right, who the hell are you? You're a kid. I said, well, I'm here to take you to the airport, take you out of here. And he's like, okay. And as we're driving, he tells me, you sound like somebody I know. I was like, well, how's that possible? He said, are you from Kentucky or something? I said, well, no, I'm from Ohio. He said, well, you sound like you're from Kentucky. I just went to so what was the name of that school? It had a strange name. What was that school? And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he said, no, I mean, it had a really strange name. Oh yeah, Moorhead. What kind of school calls itself Moorhead? He said, isn't that kind of rude? You shouldn't be doing that kind of things to people. So anytime he would be at the comedy store, he'd go by and say, hey, Moorhead. I said, I'm not from Moorhead. Stop it. I had Billy Crystal stop me one time and was like, you sound like you're from West Virginia. I said, I'm not from West Virginia. I'm from Ohio. And he started giving me flack, and he's like, I said, wait a second. You went to school at Marshall, so I don't want to hear this. And then Robin Williams walked in, and I realized, okay, it's official. I am never going to be a comedian because the first time I saw him do a set, I was like, I'm done. This is not going to happen. So I ended up coming back to Ohio to become an English teacher because I realized I'm an English person. I've always loved the language. I was fascinated by a language as a small child. I came from such a weird background because I had when we first moved into this small town, there was this we were told this is going to be a witch in the place where you guys are going to live. you got to her house, it sure looked like a witch house. It was bizarre. It was just, and when I walked in, I wasn't even in kindergarten yet when I walked into that house, and she had all these plastic bags all around her house, and it was full of plants. Well, it turns out she was the first female botanist from, and I hate to say this, the Ohio State University,
Go Bucks.
as opposed to all the other Ohio State universities. She had bagged and tagged every plant in our county and just kept them up there for some reason. And so I looked at her and said, well, I know what those words are because that's English. Because I knew what that was. She said, you know how to read? I said, yeah, I know how to read. She said, well, this is called Latin. You want to learn that? Oh, why not? I like to read. So I had Latin before I got into kindergarten. And then once we got done with kindergarten, that summer she said, well, that's good. We need to get you to keep going then. I said, well, what else we got to do? And she said, well, now we need to go with Greek. So I got Greek before I got into first grade. So when I got to first grade, my first grade teacher would be the modern equivalent of a UK basketball player because she was one and done. She taught for 1 year and then she said, thank you, good night, we're out of here. She got married, never came back. But she was fantastic for me because she just kept giving me her textbooks. So I was reading, where everybody else was reading See Spot Run, I was reading Voltaire. So for some reason I always thought I was a little different person. I found out more of that too when I got into college because, like for example, for the ACT, I didn't miss any questions. I did miss one on the SAT though, apparently. So I wasn't real pleased with myself because I was letting myself down. So I've always considered myself as a different person, but I also wanted to be somebody you could relate to.
And you've done that, and you've been able to do all these interesting things. You know, even your life narrative so far, you've talked about from southern Ohio to southern California, and then now here you are in Kentucky. And something you said earlier I thought was really stood out to me is how often we have these set goals or agendas or desires, and then things kind of go awry.
Right.
And I know recently your life has taken a big turn.
It's a major turn. As I said, my brain has basically been something that has been something of a marvel for most people. But at a very early age, they would keep testing me, trying to figure out what to do with me. My grade school had no idea what to do with me because I'd read every book we had in the system. And as I went older and older, my lovely wife, Dr. Seidel back there, never used Google until recently because she'd always just say, why do I have to? I just need to lean over and say, what's that, dear? And I'd tell her. I would get constant phone calls in college of people sending me just yelling out movie lines, and then I'd hear chuckling after I'd tell them what it was. If I read something or saw something, it was in my head. It never left. I score or I won't be scoring that now with what's going on, but I had I worked for the advanced placement scoring, and the advanced placement now with English, everybody's trying to get out of that first year of English, so they try to bypass it by taking this test. Well, the average AP reader does about, last year we had, the year before we had 14 million essays to score in 1 week, and then last year it was down to 12 million. It drops up. The average AP reader reads about 100 essays that week. I do 50,000. And it's the first time I did it, I was told, do what you always do, because for 3 different schools, I had done the placement testing for people where they should be placed for that first English class. So I thought, well, this is fine, I can do this. did that real quick, and my first table leader comes up to me and says, "You are doing a disservice to every student that we have." And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I just got here, it's my first day. And I've been doing what you guys said I was supposed to do. She said, there's no way you can read and get these scores correct. Because there's an army of people. Anybody has Dr. Silas' class, you know about all the statistics. Well, they have an army of Dr. Seidels in a room someplace all keeping track of all that information. And they will verify this person should get this score based on what they did with this other thing. And so and she told me, if you keep doing this, I'm going to send you away. So I was like, I just got here. And they pay you. And I didn't want to lose money. So I said, I'll do whatever you say. During the lunch break, she comes over to me, and I'm thinking, well, here she goes. She's getting ready to get rid of me. And she walks up and she has a paper. She said, I need to show you this. And I was like, oh, I thought it was me signing off, but yes, I will now be leaving the building. And she said, I was told, and that's when I got my first look. Like, okay, you were told what? She said, I was told that I need to get out of your way. And I said, what do you mean? She said, here's this document, and it showed where I scored. I hadn't missed any question at all that they projected. And then there's a spot where it looked like the stock market just went bam. And that's where she told me, you got to stop this. And they said, whatever you do, get out of his way. He knows what he's doing. And from that point on, I would have people come up to me and ask, are you that guy? And I'd like, oh dear God, I got tired of it after a while. So, but that was one of the skill sets that I had. And so there's plenty of people who know that from all over the place. I had somebody from that group contact Fox a couple years ago when they were doing their Superhuman show, because they wanted me to come out there for that, and I don't trust that. Because I also had a bad experience with a game show. I had a very good friend, a female friend, who stopped by one day before classes started and told me, said, we need to go see my dad. And I was like, whoa, we're just friends. And she's like, when she slapped me, I said, no, stupid, it's not that kind of friend, that thing going on. She said, you know what my dad does? Like, how would I know what your dad does? Well, he was over 3 game shows. Tic-tac-toe, Joker's Wild, not the one with Snoop, but the one back then, and Bullseye. And she said, we can make money. I was like, what do you mean we? I'm the one going to do this. She said, no, you got to do this. So we go out there. So on a Friday afternoon, we go up, go take the test. She went to go see her dad. We went through a whole process with that. When we get done, they take our scores and they start putting us in groups. And one with the highest score would be the last person to go. Well, it turns out I didn't miss any questions during that 200 question test. So I was just back there waiting until everybody got done. And we start going through the practice games, and they say, don't worry about it, we'll do different games as we go along. And I step up for my time, and I do my 5 rounds of just bam, 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 we're done real quick. And then the producer says I need a timeout. So everybody walks away, and he comes over to me and says, I need you to be happy. And I stare at him. And as Rick knows, and all the old coaches know, I have a stare. And when you get that stare, it's not real good. So I'm staring at him, like, I am happy. He's like, but you don't look happy. I said, but I'm happy inside. I'm all sorts of giddy inside. Matter of fact, I'm just ready to jump out of my skin with that, but I'm not going to. He said, well, we need you to show emotion. I said, I got emotion. I'm just not going to show it. He said, we need you to jump up and down. I said, I am not going to jump up and down from you like some monkey. And he said, but you could make a lot of money. I said, well, but if I have to jump up and down, I'm not going to do it. And he said, well, wouldn't your family want to see you make all this kind of money? I said, if they see me jump up and down, they're going to say, what kind of drugs did they give that boy whenever they got him out to California? Because he just lost his damn mind. And he's like, well, we'll see what happens. Well, sure enough, Monday morning when I get back to class, she comes up, slaps me in the head again. It's like, which is not helping me because I got mental problems now. It probably didn't help the process. And she said, Dad said you just destroyed the game, but you wouldn't smile. Why couldn't you smile? I was like, I can't smile automatically. It's just not in my system. So when I decided to go to be an educator, there was a school that needed an English person, and it was a historically black school in Ohio called Central State. I had been a political football for years between the legislators trying to kill the school. Rick knows a fine story I had about whenever we were at basketball in a tournament, and we were at what was it? Kentucky State had a shooting we saw when we walked in, because we always, during basketball tournaments, Billy and Rick and I would go over to get our White Castles to make ourselves happy, because usually we hadn't won that game.
Real quick, as you go into that story, one of the things is it's really takes us to show kind of the depth of character is, you have a person into political science and film, an athletic coach, but really gifted with just a great mind that took you all over the place. And I know that now, why don't you clue the students in, if you would, to what's going on right now with your brain?
So what's going on with my brain right now is that we discovered that there was a problem. When I was at the AP reading, the books come in at a certain level and they have to be in the right place, otherwise it messes everything up. And I should have one book beside me when I get done. I looked down at the end of the day and I had 3 books beside me, and I was like, I'm freaked out. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I went to them and said, I don't think I can do it anymore. And they told me, but you have every score right again this year. I said, but look at this. I can't do this right. If I can't do that right, I can't be here. Mm-hmm. So they sent me to HR. I never even knew where the HR department was. Found it. There was a little African-American woman there looking at me, and she looked at me sideways. And I didn't know why she was giving me that look, but turns out she had never had any male show up for an HR meeting. And I said, I need help. And she said, well, I've never seen a man your size come in here. As a matter of fact, I've never seen a man come in here. But I certainly wasn't expecting a large man come in and say, you need help. I said, but I need help, man. So she said, well, I can work on this. We'll see what happens. I know nothing about the scoring, but I can find out. So she said, come back the next morning. We'll get it worked out. That night I told my wife, get ready to move, because I'm going to get kicked out of here. Because my brain's not working right. I know it's not working right, and I don't know why. And we show up the next day, and she's waiting on me. She said, well, I got it worked out, I think, but she wanted to make sure she had the right language. And she said, but they're going to talk to you here fairly soon, so just be ready. So just about 2 minutes later, the head person of the program shows up and says, we need to talk. And I thought, well, here you're again. I'm going to get kicked out. Well, it turns out I don't get kicked out, because she says, I hear you think you're going to get kicked out. And I said, well, you have to. And she said, wait, you telling me that you know more about my job than I do? I said, no, ma'am, that's not what I'm saying. She said, it's exactly what you just said. And she said, you have to realize that you are a legend for us, that we're actually thinking about a Hall of Fame because of people like you, because you have scored over 1 million essays for us over these years. And she said, I spent the night talking to College Board and ETS, saying if we didn't have this man these last 5 years, we would not have completed our contract, because he always puts us over the number for what we needed to have. She said, we're not letting you go. And what had happened was, the week before, there was another AP class of, I think it was history, and a young lady, they would have runners bring the papers to you back and forth to make sure it was moving quickly. And she fell and hurt herself. And so they were going to get rid of her because, well, she was useless. She couldn't move the same way. They decided to have her be my helper, to keep track of the information that I was getting wrong with the numbers, but I was getting the answer correct, but I was putting in the wrong number that should go there. And my little HR person came up to me and whispered to me, because before that she was always bringing in God at some point to it and say, I can't really talk about that. I said, ma'am, I work for Presbyterian ministers. Talk like God's fine. So
let me help with what's happening if you happen to notice. So your brain is like a bunch of spaghetti. You ever seen pictures of a brain? It's a bunch of spaghetti.
Yep.
Well, Mr. Marcum's brain in the back is separated. The neurons can't reach each other. Okay? The back of your brain is where you process, where you do your iPhone, where you do a computer, where you spell, where you can figure out the keyboard, where you can figure out that you push this button and the lights go on. Okay? You put your coat on, the hood obviously is at the top, and you put your sleeve in. We were coming today and Mr. Marcum couldn't put on his own coat. He couldn't turn it the right way. He could not figure that out. He's not trying to not put on his coat.
no,
He literally can't figure that out.
I'm trying to beat the coat to death till I get to it.
And so he's got that, so he can't work because he was the academic computer person for the med school. Anything computer with the med school went through Mr. Marcum, and he can't do that anymore. So he's on permanent disability at 58. And what we also found out last week, however, was that there was actually a medical condition that is causing this. So not only is his brain separating, but he's got Alzheimer's disease, which is causing his brain cells to die. And there's no cure. He will live as long as he's going to live. They throw around things like 10 years. He can take a medication that for some people it helps increase the number of years of quality of life, but it won't increase the number of years, and that's for some people. And so what we do as a couple, we've been married 20 years, and Mr. Marcum can't do his own pills. So every morning there's a dish of pills, and if there are pills in that dish, he takes those pills. And at night, magically, there are new pills in there. Mr. Marcum can take care of himself during the day because he can make his own oatmeal. Now, I don't know, has anybody ever made instant oatmeal? 2/3 of a cup, right? 2/3, 1/3, 1/3. Mr. Marcum can't do that. Okay, can't keep track of how many he's put in.
And in the past, I trained almost everybody here.
He could figure out Canvas without a manual, people, and then he would train people. That's what he did. That his brain just figured it out. He said when we came, that was 4 course management systems ago, and except for Canvas, he taught everybody how to do it. Okay, so now 2 1/3. So we've got a cup that has 2/3 water in it. He knows he can put one of those cups in with 1 packet of oatmeal. He presses 9, 0, start.
And I'm good.
And he's good, right? So what do you do when you're faced with your mortality? What do you do when all of a sudden you're the most brilliant person people don't even, this is a very, he never went into a room and said, by the way, I'm the smartest person in the room.
No.
But Rick told him.
We just never did that to you.
It just so happened that he would wait, and she would just be biding his time, and then somebody said, the answer is this. You could tell that something was wrong when he couldn't play sorry with his 7-year-old grandchild. Because this is a person who had memorized the sorry board. He did speed sorry. Rachel, our youngest, and I, we would count out, 7.
It'd drive me crazy. I'd like, get it down here. God, just move it there.
And so he started moving everything, and he couldn't do that anymore. So that's what's going on with Mr. Mark.
We were going to, what was it? We was going to a wedding in Atlantic City. And we couldn't figure out where we were going, and all of a sudden I said, well, we're right up here. He said, how'd you know? I said, well, because that's where
The
Monopoly board game is. And I said, we went past Kentucky. He said, we're going to be right up here next. And sure enough, we went up to the orange spot, the next spot. So.
I wonder in the last few minutes that we have, Mega's talked about, you've shared with your life, and Mega shared with us a little bit. Any last words that you have you just want to share about, what's it like now for you?
What's different? I have more time on my hands because it's just me and the dogs hanging out now. Dogs are real happy because I'm there all day. For years, people have said, you have all these stories, you should probably write. Mm-hmm. And I knew that, but I've always been very busy. I've worked way beyond, I've worked for so many different things in my time. So I decided, well, if we're going to do this, I might as well do this. So now I write every night. I created a site called Random Thoughts of a I already forgot what the Demented Professor, yeah, because I thought that made sense since I had dementia. So that way, if I jump around, it makes sense. So I was thinking about doing a stand-up because I already had my first joke in mind, like, stop me if you think you've heard this before, because I probably repeated myself. But realizing that you have a time frame gets your attention pretty quickly. And I got 2 granddaughters. I want to see the young ladies. I have never, ever held back. I have always fought everything I've had. I was told on more than one occasion in my life that I was going to be dead. And I pulled that off. I heard them tell my parents, you won't see him past the 3rd grade. And I remember thinking, these are things I should not be hearing. So I decided to start making myself into something stronger. I am a large, angry man. I will not go down easily. I'm taking somebody with me. I don't know who it is, but it's coming with me because I'm going to beat this to death until I get this going. I volunteered to be part of studies with them. What can I do to help? Because I have always tried to help people. Mm-hmm. I have always tried to strengthen people. And I've been more emotional in Kentucky than I have in any place else in my life. Because I always made fun of my mom for being from Kentucky. And so when she heard that I'd taken the job at Pikeville College, as it was called at the time, she laid down the phone and laughed for about 10 minutes because I'd always harassed her about being that Kentucky girl. But this has become my home. And this place means a lot to me. And I will still fight for whoever I can. And I will be here for anybody who needs anything. Because I still think I can still do this. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do this until they drag my dead body away from me. And there's times when you get down, and when you're in college, there's so many times when suddenly this thing seems wrong and the class is not going right and the teacher didn't make sense to you. It's a tough time, especially if you're away from someplace. I went from Southern Ohio to Los Angeles. I woke up the first night thinking God was talking to me. It was just LAPD's helicopter trying to get a grip from being behind us. And I thought, oh, I'm going to the light. Okay. And I heard don't move, and I just sit there frozen, and I realized, wait, that's a helicopter. First day of classes, I go to class. I jump down because someone said, hey, there's a jump over here. I knew it wasn't a good sign when I first pulled up and when there was barbed wire on top of our complex at the place where I was at. And I jumped down and I landed and I smelled like the worst smell I ever smelled in my life. Well, it was a dead Mexican kid in the dumpster. I went across the street. This again shows the time frame. Got the phone booth and called 911 for my first and only time in my life, and I was put on hold at 7:32 in the morning. And I thought, my God, what have I done? I need to go back to Ohio right now. And the woman came back and said, you're not from around there, are you? I said, what gave you that clue? She said, first, your accent, and two, your son, there's a dead Mexican kid. And she told me that basically the LAPD considered that USC property, therefore security should handle it. Security thought it was LAPD's job. The gangs figured out, well, if no bodies in there, nobody will know. I knew because my nose was just horrible at that point because that was a foul smell. But I survived, and I moved on. And then I went to work for a school that had all these other problems, but they too were also like a family. So I've had two very good schools where I've had the time to be with people and enjoy what I do. And it kills me that I can't do what I used to do. But in the meantime, I'm still here.
That's right. And we appreciate you being vulnerable with us and sharing your life. And for all of us who have known you through the years, our words can't do justice. So in saying that, there's a tradition in sports, and Brad for a long time was assistant or a coach here, assistant basketball coach. So there's a tradition here. We have a couple gifts we're going to give Brad. But there's a tradition in basketball when a team wins a championship, right? They cut down the net. And we want to present Brad the net because you have done such a good service for us. We love you, we thank you, and we're with you in this. Please give Brad a round of applause.
Well, this is good because I never liked heights, so I never climbed up into the so I'd have to cut that down. That makes me feel better.
We have a little gift. If you would sign it at the end, you'll notice there's if you would just sign your name to it or put a little note of thanks for Brad. There's multiple markers there. Next week is our final convocation. We'll actually have the UPIKE choir who will be here with us. Same space, same time. We'd love to have you next week. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you all.
Oh, is it time? I gotta get going. Governor wants to go.
Stay in there. I am.